IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Anirudh Kanisetti. Today I'm joined by Prateek, Waghre, researcher with our technology policy program, and Rohini Lakshané, who's with the Bachao project. And both of these guys have done absolutely fascinating research on the Kashmir Whitelist that's recently been published by the government, which is a list of 150 and then now 300 sites, which are supposed to be accessible in Kashmir. But our friends here have highlighted a number of issues pertaining to the way the whitelist functions and have some broader points to make about access to internet being a fundamental right for Indians today. But before we begin, a quick message from our sponsors.
We would like to thank HDFC Life Insurance for supporting this show. HDFC Life Insurance has created an online video series called Behind the Journey with some of the most interesting people from the creative and entertainment industry. It explores the stories that are behind the glitz and glamour of the spotlight and screaming fans. Let's listen to a snippet from the episode featuring singer Jasleen Royal.
Music थोड़ी expensive hobby होती है, and for middle class parents to understand that and support you can be a little difficult. So I went to my music teacher and he said like, why don't you teach my batch? And I started taking his batches. So the goal was like to earn around 40,000 क्योंकि मुझे एक keyboard लेना था अपने लिए. I saved money every penny I made and I got that keyboard.
Saving money is a key component to take care of your dreams and your finances. You can watch all episodes of Behind the Journey on HDFC Life Insurance YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/HDFC Life. Take control of your personal goals with HDFC Life Insurance's financial solutions. Plan now with HDFC Life Insurance.
Terms and conditions apply. HDFC Life Insurance Company Limited, IRDAI registration number 101.
Okay, welcome back. So let's get straight to business, Prateek. Can you tell us a little bit about what this whitelist exactly is? Why does a whitelist exist? Does it work at all?
Yeah, so it started with on January 14th with the Supreme Court basically, hearing the Anuradha Bhasin versus Union of India case, and it basically said that the right to internet access is a fundamental right. The state should find a way to restore essential services to the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir. That included things like banking, etc., and which is what sort of then led to this whitelist exercise, right? And it happened in two parts. There was first an order from the Civil Secretariat of Jammu on the 18th of January, which had 153 websites, and then they updated that on the 24th with 301 websites, and that order is valid till the 31st. So we could see potentially an update to this whitelist on 1st February.
So Rohini, analyzing this whitelist was your initial idea, right? Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
The idea was to get a sense of the experience of an ordinary resident of Jammu and Kashmir accessing the internet under the whitelist arrangement. The situation in Jammu and Kashmir is unprecedented. About 14 million people in a democracy living in a state of lockdown for more than 5 months. The only internet access available to the people before the Supreme Court judgment of January 10 was via internet kiosks placed in government premises and via internet connections that have been active for the past few months in specific districts. Mobile internet was completely shuttered, and that is what prompted us to do this exercise. Present-day websites and services are not built for 2G speeds, which are the only speeds permitted by the government's prevalent orders. Present-day websites also depend on a lot of elements external to their security. That is the website security, the user security, in order to enhance the user's experience and so on. While partial internet access has theoretically been restored in response to the Supreme Court judgment, we wanted to know how usable a whitelist of about 300 entries would practically be. There are about 1.7 billion websites on the internet by one count.
So once you guys actually started working on analyzing this whitelist, How did you go about doing it? How does one analyze a whitelist of internet websites? How does it work? Like I'm assuming that you essentially have to put yourself in the shoes of a Kashmiri internet user, right? So how does that happen?
Right. Yeah, so there are a couple of ways that this can be done. One, I think there's a technical way of doing it, which is you write up a script, you go to all the websites and try to analyze which requests would work and which did not work. We didn't use that approach. We used a simpler approach, which is, like you said, putting ourselves in the shoes of someone who might be accessing it there. And we basically set up our browsers to only allow requests to those certain websites or domain names that were entered in that whitelist. Right, and we tested the website as it would look without that extension in place and with the extension in place. We looked for what sort of redirects it may do. Just a bit of usability testing. Can you browse the website? Is the layout affected in any way? Right? Does it have a login page? Can you successfully actually log in? Right, and depending on the type of website it is, can you achieve the main function, which is, let's say, with a banking website, can you actually log in and do personal banking, that sort of stuff. So it was essentially usability testing. We didn't do anything a little more complicated than that.
So you mentioned redirects. Considering that the whitelist is basically a list of domains that you can access in Kashmir, how exactly do redirects work in that? In fact, why exactly are redirects important to the way websites work in the first place?
So there are two parts to it, right? Redirecting is one component, and then the actual structure of web pages is another component. So redirects can be for a whole bunch of simple reasons, like if you can try to connect to the website over HTTP, which is non-secure and readable, it automatically redirects you to HTTPS. Or another practice that some websites do is, let's say you go to www.facebook.com. Not the best example because social media sites aren't allowed. But it'll probably redirect you to just facebook.com, which they use for their various purposes, right? That's one aspect of it. And it's interesting you bring that up because that could potentially affect this as well, affect behavior as well, because if you have only a www.something version on your whitelist and it's redirecting to something else, it may not work. It most likely will not work unless that is explicitly on the whitelist too. The other aspect of this is the actual page, the way the web pages today are structured, right? The way it happens is, again, as a user, you just see a request for, we'll take the example of Amazon IRCTC for something like that. You just enter the website in your browser, right? What you don't typically see is that there's a whole bunch of requests that your browser makes, under the hood to access various elements from that page. So the images, for example, typically come from a different domain, like an images.something.com, right? Or they could be coming from a CDN, which sometimes will be on a completely different domain, like a cloudflare.net or a cloudfront.net or an akamai.net or something like that. There's also things like Google Analytics, etc., that go into your various analytics tool that people use. I do want to point out that we didn't consider that itself to be a point of failure, because as long as the website worked, it was okay. A user may not care that Google Analytics is not working, but a website operator will, right? But from our testing, since we kept it from the user's perspective, we sort of ignored that. But there is that point that it will affect the actual behavior of websites.
So, for example, if I have to open a website that's been whitelisted in Kashmir, there is no guarantee, for example, that I would be able to see images, that I would be able to log in, that I would be able to conduct transactions and so on and so forth, right?
Correct. Exactly. So images, right? And then the structure of a page is also defined by a style sheet, again, which follows the same principle. Images, they might come from different domains. And we actually saw that a number of websites, the layout was completely broken, right? It just looked like plain text garbled all the way down. So you wouldn't be able to really use that website very easily. The other aspect, like you said, about logging in is that a lot of websites tend to redirect you to a different domain to log in, right? So, for example, a banking website typically takes you to a retail.something or a banking.something. One example that we came across was SBI, which is the domain that was on the whitelist was www.onlinesbi.com. But the moment you try to log into your personal banking, it takes you to retail.onlinesbi.com, which is, of course, not on the whitelist, and you're not able to log in, right? So you can't really do any sort of banking You also mentioned transaction, which is an interesting thing, because for an actual transaction to happen, it goes to a payment gateway, which uses their own, typically use their own URL, their own addresses. The whitelist did not contain any of them. Now, we didn't actually go to the extent of attempting a transaction, but it's a fairly good estimate that any attempted transactions will fail.
Interesting. Okay, so Rohini, I wanted to ask you about the actual results of your study, right? I remember going through the thread that you guys put out on Saturday, and I looked at a pre-published version of the article that you guys have written about this. And you mentioned that there's a number of duplicate entries, and there seem to be some domains that aren't even Indian, for example. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Interesting results, duplicate entries, foreign domains. The government has repeatedly stated in its public communication and the orders for whitelisting that the purpose of the prolonged and blanket internet shutdown in Jammu and Kashmir was quote-unquote terrorist activity and quote-unquote anti-national activities happening via the internet. In light of this fact, it is hard for us to tell the process and criteria that the government might have used to determine the entries that made it to the whitelist and those that didn't. The whitelist includes Yahoo Search for Quebec in Canada, Google Canada, and Google UK, but not Google India. Now, based on the user's IP address and the settings of their devices or browsers, chances are that Google Canada, etc., would redirect to Google India, and chances are that the whitelisting arrangement won't allow it. Another example is that there are websites for private coaching centers, but not of public universities in India, that are located outside Jammu and Kashmir. There is the wikipedia.org homepage listed as an educational website, but that URL is really that of a directory linking to Wikipedia in 300 odd languages, including Kashmiri, and Wikipedia's media repository, a semantic database called Wikidata, among other things. So it's unclear if any of these would be made available, these Wikipedia domains would be made available, as the whitelist does not contain any qualifying information about the entries or any mention of including subdomains of whitelisted entries.
And Prateek, I think you actually have numbers in terms of how many websites of this whitelist are actually accessible, actually functional for the Kashmiri internet user, right?
Correct. So the updated whitelist, right, from the 24th order included 301 entries in there. Once we removed duplicates, number of websites that did not have any actual URLs there, invalid URLs, we eliminated about 31. So we were left with 270 for the actual testing. And then what we did was we put them into three buckets. One was that it is practically not usable at all. One is that it's partially usable, which is to say that some functionality is affected, but you can pretty much do the main thing, that main purpose of the website. And the other one was that it's practically usable in that there was minimally very little visible impact to the website, or it was just a simple textual website, so it wasn't really affected in any way.
So how many of these websites are practically usable?
Yeah, so in terms of how many were usable, it was 58. The number that were partially usable was 68. That's about 126, right? And the remaining were all unusable, right? That's about.
So clearly whoever has created this whitelist either doesn't know how the internet works or knows very well how the internet works and is putting this out as a kind of positioning or posturing from the government side. Would you think that's a fair assessment?
It's hard to say, and to be honest, it could even be both, right? There could be one level that an aspect of maybe headline management saying that we've given access to so many sites, but there's also a good chance that whoever came up with this whitelist did not consider these aspects, right? Did not really, and it seems unlikely that any sort of testing happened to make sure that these things would work, because otherwise we wouldn't be here where we're able to say that 150 of those websites are not working.
So do we know anything at all about who are the people that might be making these decisions, how this is actually being implemented, Rohini?
The orders with the accompanying whitelist were released by the Department of Home, the government of Jammu and Kashmir, And the orders mention that law enforcement departments are involved in deciding the entries that make it to the list, and that the whitelist will be continually updated. Now, based on our testing and analysis, we have several questions about how internet service providers would actually implement some of the points in the orders and some whitelisted entries that we found to be indeterminate, while also avoiding liability as an intermediary. A news report that I read today on The Wire states that the Home Department of Jammu and Kashmir told The Wire that they are adding informally to some news websites to the whitelist, even if they haven't issued a formal order to that effect. Given that the whitelisting arrangement is an unprecedented situation and that there's also lack of transparency and publicly available information about how this exercise was carried out, all in all, it is difficult to tell what is actually on the whitelist and what is not, and how it will be implemented.
So let's try to situate this whitelist within a broader context, right? Now, the judiciary has quite frequently said that the right to internet can be considered a fundamental right, in the sense that the state cannot deprive you of it, and you can go to the judiciary for redressal if the state does so. Yet at the same time, the Supreme Court, while upholding this, has merely asked the government to do a review, which is, as you pointed out, which is what led to this whitelist being created in the first place. So what I want to ask you guys at a broader level is, what do you think the future of Indians' right to access the internet is going to be? Do you see this becoming, this whitelisting becoming more and more of a regular feature? Do you see the establishment of a regular bureaucracy? And if really the issue is so-called quote-unquote national security, do you think that censoring the internet is really the best way to ensure national security?
Right. So, on your point about this becoming a precedent, right? I think it's absolutely possible that this becomes the precedent. And I think that's one of the reasons that we went to the extent of trying to research this and test this, right? Because our aim is to highlight very clearly that this is not a workable option, right? The internet is billions of websites. To say that 300 websites, access to 300 websites, and even that is questionable, as our testing found, is not really access to internet per se, right? So, as you mentioned, the Kerala High Court sort of upheld that, the Supreme Court upheld that as well, right? So there is a chance that this might become precedent, but that is absolutely not the way it should go. The one positive, I think, is that this may cause a rethink of our frequent use of internet shutdowns. Now, it's hard to say whether it'll actually result in us completely moving away from the internet shutdown. As you know, right, we are, I think, by far the world leader in terms of the number of internet shutdowns.
Yep.
I think 2019 number crossed 100, right? And owing to the CA and NRC protests, that we've seen all through January, we still continue seeing internet shutdowns. Another alternative potentially is, I've seen this suggestion a lot, is instead of a whitelist, you do a blacklist. Which is, you say that these are the websites you identify and you block them, right? Again, personally, I have my issues with those, but keeping that aside, right? Even as a model, I don't think that's workable either, because if right, if you're expecting websites to be blacklisted, you're going to find alternatives, right? So anyone, let's say, who's a malicious actor is going to find an alternative. The ordinary user over time will find an alternative, right? But with these approaches, what you basically do is you're just affecting the ordinary citizen disproportionately, right? People who want to find ways to do things are going to find ways to do things.
I don't think there are any. Have there been systematic studies done about the kind of economic costs that these internet shutdowns are imposing on the Indian economy? Especially at a time when growth is slowing down, employment's in the dumps, consumption's decreasing. It seems almost foolhardy to be consistently cutting off large sections of the Indian population from the internet and to cut them away from revenue-generating opportunities.
Yeah, so I think, with this current round of shutdowns, we're still in the middle of it. So I don't think there is actual research that's gone into it yet, but there was research from 2018 which said that with internet shutdown, India lost up to potentially $3 billion. There was also research that said every day of internet shutdown results in, I think.
Okay, so thank you guys so much for this illuminating research. I wish that I could say that I was as optimistic about the government revising its stance on internet shutdowns as you guys are, because to me, frankly, it seems like headline management. I saw a senior Jammu and Kashmir police officer, for example, commenting yesterday that, oh, this is a gift to you for Republic Day. It seems worrisome to me that the government is seeing its provision of fundamental rights as a favor that is doing to citizens instead of its fundamental duty to them. And on that very optimistic note, thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you, Rohini. Thank you, Prateek. And thank you so much for listening to All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. Thank you, HDFC Life, for coming on board. Also, would like to thank Storytel for continuing the long time advertising that they've been doing with us. And if you have a brand and you'd like to advertise with us, please send us an email. We'd love to talk to you. And let me tell you a couple of things that you should check out this week. On What Up Players, Siddhartha and Mikhail talk about the India-Australia series and discuss who's better between Virat Kohli and Steve Smith. On States of Anarchy, Hamsani is joined by Vineet Hegde to discuss the crisis and dispute mechanisms at the World Trade Organization. On Simplified Shorties, Chuck, Naren and Shriketh welcome their new co-host, Tony Sebastian. On Advertising is Dead, Varun talks to film critic Sucharita Tyagi, known for the popular Not a Review film series on Film Companion. On Agla Station Adulthood, Ritasha asks Ayushi 36 questions. Udipan Sarma joins Zarina on the Empowering series. He's the lead singer of the band as we keep searching. Thanks and keep listening.
Do you wish you were smarter? Well, so do we. But the next best thing?
We could make you sound smarter.
And to help you with this endeavor, we are Simplified, a podcast that attempts to break down the complex world around you with a little knowledge, a lot of poor jokes, and a ton of random trivia.
Episodes out every Monday
on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
See ya!